"I'm taking half of your millions, including your grandmother's estate," Ethan Hale announced with a smug grin, his voice bouncing around the courtroom like he was calling out lottery numbers. The confidence in his tone made my stomach twist, but I forced myself to stay calm at the defendant's table. "My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 45 years old, and I never imagined I'd be sitting in a divorce courtroom in Nashville, Tennessee, watching my husband of 5 years try to steal everything I had worked for my entire life." Ethan sat across the room beside his attorney, looking like a man who believed he'd already won. His tailored navy suit, one I had paid for, was perfectly pressed. His blonde hair was slicked back in that familiar way that once made him charming and now made my skin crawl. "Your Honor," Ethan's lawyer continued smoothly, "my client is entitled to 50% of all marital assets, including the substantial inheritance Mrs. Whitmore received during the marriage." The attorney's briefcase was stuffed with documents, neatly organized, carefully prepared, each one designed to help Ethan walk away with my grandmother's money. I noticed the spectators leaning forward in their seats. A few whispered to each other, likely estimating how many millions Ethan was about to take. 2 reporters sat quietly in the back, their pens ready, drawn in by rumors of a high-profile divorce involving a well-known Nashville consultant. Judge Marilyn Brooks, a stern woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, reviewed the paperwork without revealing a hint of emotion. She'd been on the bench for more than 20 years. I knew she had seen greed before, but not like this. Ethan turned slightly in his chair and flashed me what he probably thought was a victorious smile. The audacity of it made my blood boil. This was the same man who once brought me coffee in bed. The man who swore he loved me for who I was, not for what I had. 5 years of marriage, and it had all been a lie. The courtroom felt heavy with dark wood paneling and unspoken judgment. Outside, I could faintly hear traffic moving along Broadway, people living their ordinary lives while mine was being torn apart in public. I tightened my grip on my purse. Inside it was an envelope that would change everything. "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Brooks said, finally looking up. "Do you have a response to these claims?" I stood slowly, my heart pounding, but my resolve steady. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment Ethan's greed would finally catch up with him. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I believe there's something the court needs to see." As I stood there, memories flooded back, memories of all the warning signs I'd ignored. I had met Ethan during a particularly vulnerable time in my life. I had just turned 40 and was running my consulting firm, Northbridge Strategic Solutions. The business was successful, but my personal life was empty. My grandmother had been my closest companion, and her death had left a hole I didn't know how to fill. Then Ethan appeared at a business conference in Memphis. He was attentive, charming, and seemed genuinely fascinated by my work. "You're incredible," he'd say, watching me analyze financial models. "Most people don't understand numbers like you do." At the time, I thought he admired my intelligence. Now I knew he was calculating my net worth. Our relationship moved fast, too fast. Expensive dinners. Weekend getaways. Lavish gestures that felt romantic, but should have raised questions. Ethan worked as a pharmaceutical sales manager, yet he never seemed worried about money. "I believe in investing in people," he'd say when I asked how he afforded such a lifestyle. I was flattered. I was lonely. And I believed him. When he proposed after just 8 months, my instincts told me to slow down. My grandmother had always warned me about men who rushed commitment. But Ethan was relentless. "Life's too short to wait," he insisted. "I know what I want, and I want you." The proposal was extravagant, a private riverboat dinner with live music and champagne. The ring was stunning. Probably worth more than his yearly salary, though I didn't question it then. My attorney, Linda Carver, did. Claire, you need a prenuptial agreement, she told me firmly. You've built too much to leave it unprotected. I hesitated, worried Ethan would be offended. But when I finally brought it up, his reaction shocked me. He laughed. Of course, he said casually. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. I'm not marrying you for your money. He signed the agreement without reading it, joking that love didn't need fine print. That moment had convinced me I was wrong about him. Standing now in this courtroom, I realized how dangerously wrong I'd been. Because everything Ethan was doing today, every lie, every claim, had been planned from the very beginning. And I was finally ready to expose him. Looking back, the moment everything truly shifted wasn't the courtroom confrontation, it was the phone call that came 18 months into my marriage. I was sitting in my office at Northbridge Strategic Solutions, reviewing quarterly projections, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my attorney's number. Claire, Linda Carver said gently, your grandmother's estate has officially been settled. I remember gripping the edge of my desk, my heart suddenly racing. My grandmother had always been careful, private about her finances. I never expected much, certainly not what came next. She left everything to you, Linda continued. The house. Her investment portfolio. Her personal collections. And approximately $2.8 million in managed funds. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The number felt unreal. My grandmother had lived modestly, quietly saving and investing for decades. She'd never talked about wealth, only responsibility. When I told Ethan that night, his reaction should have been my wake-up call. 2.8 million, he repeated, his eyes wide. Claire, we are rich. The way he said we made something twist in my chest, though I brushed it aside. From that day forward, Ethan changed. At first, it was subtle. He started talking about bigger plans, and finally living the life we deserved. Within 6 months, he quit his job. I want to support you full-time, he said. Focus on us. What he really meant was that he wanted full access to my money. He bought a luxury car, claiming it was for networking. He invested in a friend's restaurant without asking me first, an investment that collapsed within a year, taking $30,000 with it. He joined an exclusive golf club, booked extravagant vacations, and began dressing like someone who'd always been wealthy. Whenever I questioned the spending, Ethan would smile and say, "We are married. We are a team. Don't you trust me?" I wanted to believe that marriage meant partnership. But partnership requires honesty, and Ethan had none. The breaking point came 6 months ago, at a country club fundraiser. I overheard Ethan laughing with a group of acquaintances. The inheritance, he said casually. Family money. It belongs to both of us. I felt the air leave my lungs. Later that night, I confronted him. You told them my grandmother's money belongs to you, I said. Ethan didn't apologize. He didn't even deny it. You act like it's a big secret, he snapped. Everyone knows I married up. The cruelty of his words stunned me. Before me, he continued, you were just a lonely workaholic. I gave you a life. That was the moment I finally saw him clearly. I began paying closer attention, and what I discovered terrified me. Emails. Private messages. Conversations with a divorce attorney discussing timing, strategy, and asset division. Ethan had been planning this long before we ever fought. He'd researched Tennessee divorce laws. He'd calculated how to frame himself as a supportive spouse who sacrificed his career. He wasn't just greedy. He was patient. That's when I called Linda again. I want a divorce, I told her. And I want to do this right. Linda didn't hesitate. Good, she said. Because the prenuptial agreement is airtight. She reviewed everything with me, the inheritance clause, the asset protections, the requirement that all inheritance remain separate. She confirmed what I desperately needed to hear. Ethan was entitled to nothing. From that moment on, I kept every inheritance dollar completely separate. I paid household expenses from my regular income. I documented every debt Ethan accumulated on his own. When Ethan finally served me divorce papers, demanding half of everything, I wasn't surprised. I was ready. Which is how I found myself standing in a Nashville courtroom, holding an envelope that would destroy the illusion Ethan had built so carefully. As I approached the judge's bench, I could feel Ethan watching me, his earlier confidence flickering. "Your Honor," I said clearly, "this is a prenuptial agreement my husband signed 6 weeks before our marriage." The reaction was immediate. Ethan's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, we were not made aware of any prenuptial agreement." Judge Brooks raised a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. I will review the document." As she opened the envelope, I returned to my seat, my gaze fixed on Ethan. His expression shifted, confidence to confusion, confusion to panic. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering frantically. Linda sat beside me, calm and prepared. "Just watch," she whispered. Judge Brooks read carefully, page by page. The silence in the courtroom felt electric. Finally, she looked up. "This appears to be a valid, properly executed prenuptial agreement," she said. "Signed, witnessed, notarized." Ethan stood up abruptly. "I don't remember signing that," he said, his voice shaking. "Mr. Hale," Judge Brooks snapped. "Sit down." For the first time since I'd met him, Ethan looked afraid. And I knew, his plan was falling apart. The courtroom felt different after Judge Brooks acknowledged the prenuptial agreement. What had once been a stage for Ethan's confidence became a place of quiet tension. People leaned forward in their seats. Reporters stopped whispering and started listening. Even Ethan's attorney, Mark Hale, looked unsettled, flipping through his notes as if hoping a miracle might fall out of his briefcase. Ethan, however, was unraveling. He kept shaking his head, whispering to Mark in short, frantic bursts. "I caught fragments, she never told me, this can't be real, there has to be a way." Judge Brooks adjusted her glasses and continued reading, her expression unreadable. "The agreement clearly states that all assets owned prior to marriage, as well as any inheritance received during the marriage, remain the sole property of the original owner," she said. Ethan stood again, unable to stop himself. "That's not fair," he blurted out. "I supported her. I gave up my career." "Mr. Hale," Judge Brooks said sharply, "this is your final warning. Sit down." He collapsed back into his chair, his face flushed with anger and fear. The charm he once relied on had vanished completely. Mark finally stood. "Your Honor," he said cautiously, "my client believes he was misled regarding the nature of this document. He was told it was merely a formality." Judge Brooks raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting your client signed a legal document without reading it?" Mark hesitated. "My client trusted his fiancée at the time." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Brooks flipped another page. "The document explicitly advises both parties to seek independent legal counsel." Mr. Hale waved that right. "Correct?" Mark nodded stiffly. "Yes, Your Honor." "And the document was notarized, with witnesses present?" "Yes." Judge Brooks leaned back slightly, studying Ethan. "Mr. Hale, were you under duress when you signed this agreement?" Ethan swallowed. "No. Were you coerced?" "No. Did anyone prevent you from reading the document?" He hesitated. "No, but Claire said it didn't matter." Judge Brooks's expression hardened. "Mr. Hale, personal regret does not invalidate a contract." For the first time since the proceedings began, I felt a calm settle over me. Not relief, clarity. The truth was finally louder than Ethan's lies. Judge Brooks continued. This agreement is thorough, balanced, and legally sound. Financial disclosures were complete. The inheritance clause is clear. She paused, then turned toward me. Ms. Bennett, she said, did you keep your inheritance separate from marital assets? Yes, Your Honor, I replied. It was maintained in separate accounts and never commingled. Ethan exploded. That's a lie. She paid for vacations. She bought things for us. Judge Brooks slammed her gavel. Mr. Hale, one more interruption and you will be removed. Ethan slumped back, breathing hard. Linda leaned toward me and whispered, he's done. Judge Brooks adjusted the papers again. Section 6, she read aloud, addresses spousal support. Quote, neither party shall be entitled to alimony or spousal support regardless of marriage duration or income disparity. This section is initialed by both parties. Ethan looked like he'd been punched. No alimony, he whispered. Judge Brooks nodded once. Correct. Mark tried one final argument. Your Honor, perhaps the agreement is unconscionable given the financial disparity. Judge Brooks looked unimpressed. Mr. Hale, the disparity existed at the time of signing, and your client acknowledged full awareness of it. This agreement anticipated precisely this situation. She closed the folder. I have seen many prenuptial agreements in my career. This is one of the most carefully constructed. Ethan's confidence shattered completely. This isn't right, he muttered. 5 years has to mean something. Judge Brooks met his gaze. It does mean something, she said coolly. It means you are bound by the agreement you signed. Linda stood. Your Honor, we would also like to submit documentation of debts incurred solely by Mr. Hale during the marriage. Judge Brooks nodded. Proceed. I handed over the folder, credit card statements, loan documents, investment records. The total was unmistakable. $87,000 in personal debt. Judge Brooks reviewed the papers quietly, then looked up. Mr. Hale, she said, according to Section 7 of this agreement, individual debts remain the responsibility of the party who incurred them. Ethan's face went pale. You mean, yes, Judge Brooks said. You will retain full responsibility for these debts. The courtroom erupted in whispers. From millions, to nothing. Ethan stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped, his illusion completely destroyed. Judge Brooks raised her gavel. This court grants the divorce petition filed by Ms. Bennett. No assets shall be transferred to Mr. Hale. All individual debts remain with the responsible party. She brought the gavel down. Court is adjourned. Ethan didn't move. Not when people stood. Not when reporters rushed forward. Not when Mark packed his briefcase in silence. I stood slowly, feeling lighter than I had in years. As I turned to leave, Ethan finally looked up. Claire, he said weakly. We need to talk. I met his eyes, no anger, no sadness. It was over the moment you chose money over love, I said quietly. Then I walked away. Walking out of the courtroom felt surreal. The heavy wooden doors closed behind me, muting the noise of reporters and spectators, but the weight I'd been carrying for years lifted almost instantly. I hadn't realized how tightly fear had wrapped itself around my life until that moment. Fear of losing everything. Fear of being blamed. Fear that somehow, Ethan would still find a way to twist reality in his favor. But the law doesn't care about charm. Linda placed a gentle hand on my shoulder as we walked down the marble hallway. You handled that perfectly, she said. You stayed calm, factual, and prepared. Judges respect that. I nodded, though my thoughts were elsewhere. I kept replaying the look on Ethan's face when Judge Brooks ruled. Not anger. Not even sadness. It was disbelief, the shock of a man who had always assumed things would work out for him, suddenly realizing the world didn't owe him anything. Outside the courthouse, the Nashville sun was blindingly bright. A few reporters tried to approach, but Linda stepped in smoothly, offering a short statement about respecting privacy and letting the legal process conclude. I appreciated her professionalism. Ethan had tried to turn my life into a spectacle. I wasn't going to help him. That evening, alone in my house, the silence felt different. Not empty, peaceful. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the back patio, watching the sky shift from orange to deep blue. For the first time in months, I wasn't bracing myself for confrontation. No passive-aggressive comments. No guilt-laced conversations about money. No carefully worded excuses for why another expense made sense. The truth settled in slowly. I had been used. Not all at once. Not obviously. Ethan hadn't stormed into my life demanding money. He'd offered affection, validation, companionship. He'd learned my insecurities and mirrored them back to me as devotion. And when the inheritance arrived, it didn't change him, it revealed him. The days following the ruling were strangely quiet. Ethan didn't call. His attorney didn't contest the decision. There were no appeals, no dramatic last attempts to negotiate. Linda later told me his legal options were non-existent. The prenuptial agreement had closed every door before he even realized they existed. Within a week, the financial fallout began. Ethan's credit cards were frozen. The car loan he'd taken out in his own name went unpaid. The country club revoked his membership. The lifestyle he'd worn like a costume began slipping away piece by piece. I didn't celebrate it. But I didn't feel guilty either. Consequences weren't revenge. They were simply reality catching up. Friends began reaching out, some cautiously, some openly apologetic. A few admitted they'd always felt something was off about Ethan, but didn't know how to say it. Others confessed they'd been impressed by his confidence, assuming it came from success rather than entitlement. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Marianne, someone I barely knew socially. She wrote that she'd been considering marriage and had never thought about a prenuptial agreement before hearing about my case through mutual friends. "Thank you for being open about it," she said. "You might have saved me from a very expensive mistake." That message stayed with me. A week later, I met with Linda again, not for legal defense, but for planning. "I want to do something useful with this," I told her. "Not just protect myself. Help others avoid the same situation." She leaned back, thoughtful. "Like education. Legal access." "Both," I said. "Especially for women who don't have the resources or confidence to protect themselves." That was how the idea for the Bennett Foundation began. We structured it carefully: legal consultations, financial literacy workshops, and assistance for women entering marriages with significant assets or businesses. Not to scare them. To inform them. Money didn't ruin my marriage. Ignorance nearly did. Meanwhile, Ethan faded quickly. His social circle shrank. People who once praised his success stopped returning calls. The stories traveled fast in Nashville's business community. A man who married into money, tried to claim an inheritance, and walked away with debt instead. Reputations, I learned, are far more fragile than bank accounts. Months later, I ran into Ethan's sister at a charity event. She looked uncomfortable but polite. "He moved back to Memphis," she said quietly. "Things didn't work out here." I nodded, neither surprised nor curious enough to ask more. That chapter was closed. On the anniversary of the divorce ruling, I visited my grandmother's old house. The one whose inheritance had sparked everything. I sat in her reading room, surrounded by the books she loved, and felt an unexpected sense of gratitude. She had taught me to be careful, not fearful. To protect what mattered without apologizing for it. As I locked the door behind me, I realized something important. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply walking forward unburdened. And for the first time in a long while, my life felt entirely my own again. The real consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came quietly, like invoices sliding under doors, unanswered calls, and doors that no longer opened when Ethan knocked. At first, I heard things secondhand. Mutual acquaintances stopped by my office under the excuse of checking in, but their curiosity was transparent. They wanted to know how badly Ethan had fallen. Whether the rumors were true. Whether I felt sorry for him. I gave polite, neutral answers. What I didn't say was that watching someone unravel isn't satisfying, it's sobering. Ethan had built his entire identity around access. Access to money, status, and the illusion of success. When all of that vanished, there was nothing underneath. No career momentum. No professional network that respected him. No savings to soften the landing. Linda later confirmed what I already suspected. He filed for bankruptcy, she told me during one of our foundation meetings. Chapter 7. The debt was too much. $87,000. Gone, but not forgotten. Bankruptcy erased numbers, not reputations. The Nashville business circle was small, and word spread quickly. Ethan's name became shorthand for a warning. Invitations dried up. Networking events went quiet. People remembered how confidently he'd talked about shared wealth and our investments, and how quickly that confidence evaporated in court. Meanwhile, my life began expanding in ways I hadn't anticipated. The Bennett Foundation launched quietly at first. No press releases. No dramatic announcements. Just a website, a phone number, and partnerships with a few trusted law firms. I didn't want attention. I wanted impact. Within weeks, the emails started arriving. Women in their 30s and 40s. Small business owners. Widows. Professionals entering second marriages. Some were wealthy. Many weren't. But they all shared the same fear, the fear of being seen as greedy for wanting protection. I don't want him to think I don't trust him. He says prenups mean you're planning for divorce. I feel guilty even asking. I recognized every sentence. I started hosting small workshops, nothing formal. Just conversations. I told my story plainly, without dramatics. No villain speeches. No courtroom theatrics. Just facts. Love doesn't disappear because you protect yourself. Trust doesn't mean blindness. And money doesn't make you heartless, it makes you visible. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, a woman stayed behind. She was younger than me, probably mid-30s, hands shaking slightly as she packed her bag. My fiancé gets angry when I ask about finances, she admitted. He says I should just trust him. I met her eyes gently. Anger isn't reassurance, I said. It's a warning. She nodded slowly, like someone hearing a truth they already knew, but hadn't wanted to accept. Moments like that reminded me why the foundation mattered. Ethan tried to reach me once. The email landed in my inbox late at night, subject line simply reading, "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long moment. Not because I missed him. Not because I felt conflicted. But because I wanted to be sure of my answer. I deleted it. Some conversations don't bring closure. They reopen wounds. A few weeks later, Linda forwarded me a message she'd received indirectly from Ethan's attorney. He was struggling to find stable employment. His previous sales role wouldn't take him back. His reputation followed him into interviews. He wanted to negotiate. Not legally, personally. I'm not interested, I told her calmly. And I wasn't. I had mourned the marriage long before the divorce papers were signed. The courtroom had simply confirmed what my heart already knew. As months passed, my home felt lighter. I redecorated, not extravagantly, but intentionally. I removed objects that carried memories of compromise. The oversized dining table chosen for entertaining people I never liked. The artwork Ethan insisted looked expensive. I replaced them with things that felt like me. Bookshelves. Warm lighting. Quiet corners. Peace is surprisingly practical. One afternoon, while reviewing foundation grant applications, I found myself thinking about the woman I had been 5 years earlier. Successful, yes, but eager to be chosen. Grateful for attention. Willing to ignore discomfort to preserve harmony. I didn't judge her. She did the best she could with what she knew. But I was no longer her. The final update about Ethan came unexpectedly. A mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing him working an entry-level sales position in Memphis, living with his parents. No car. No club memberships. No stories about investments. Just reality. I felt no triumph, only distance. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since the divorce. I didn't win because he lost. I won because I stopped losing myself. The foundation continued growing. Quietly. Effectively. Women began sharing their stories with each other, not out of bitterness, but empowerment. And slowly, the narrative shifted. Prenuptial agreements stopped being whispered about. Boundaries stopped being framed as betrayal. And financial literacy became a form of self-respect. I closed my laptop that evening, stretched, and looked around my home. For the first time, nothing here felt borrowed. Everything, my peace, my security, my future, was fully mine. Healing didn't happen in a single moment of clarity. It arrived in fragments, quiet mornings without tension, decisions made without needing permission, laughter that didn't feel rehearsed. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd been editing while married to Ethan until there was no one left to perform for. The strangest part was the silence. No financial interrogations. No subtle guilt wrapped in charm. No need to justify why I deserved what I had built. Silence, I learned, can be generous. As the foundation expanded, I began receiving invitations, panels, legal seminars, women's business forums. At first, I declined most of them. I wasn't interested in becoming a symbol or a cautionary tale. But Patricia convinced me otherwise. Your story isn't about revenge, she said during lunch one afternoon. It's about agency. That's what people need to hear. She was right. At one conference in Atlanta, a woman in the audience asked a question that lingered with me long after the session ended. Do you ever feel guilty, she asked, for protecting yourself so completely? The room went quiet. I thought carefully before answering. No, I said. I feel guilty for the years I believed love required me to shrink. Heads nodded. Some people looked relieved. Others looked shaken. After the event, several attendees approached me privately. One woman admitted her husband managed all their finances and refused transparency. Another said her fiancé joked about marrying into comfort a little too often. I didn't tell them what to do. I didn't have to. Sometimes the truth doesn't need instructions, it just needs permission to be acknowledged. Back in Nashville, my days settled into a rhythm I'd never known before. Work at Brightvale Vale Analytics became invigorating again. Without emotional drain, my focus sharpened. I expanded the firm, hired 2 new analysts, and turned down projects that didn't align with my values. Saying no felt revolutionary. One evening, while reviewing contracts at home, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Ethan's sister. We'd never been close, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "I know I shouldn't call," she said quickly, "but I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. For how he treated you. For how we didn't see it." I sat down slowly, surprised by the unexpected ache in my chest. "Thank you," I said after a pause. "That means more than you know." She hesitated. "He still blames you," she added quietly. "But I don't anymore." That conversation marked something important, not reconciliation, but release. I no longer needed validation from his world. I had my own. Later that month, the foundation approved its largest grant yet, funding legal assistance for women leaving financially abusive marriages. Watching the approval email go out felt surreal. My grandmother's legacy had come full circle. She hadn't just left me money. She'd left me leverage. And eventually, purpose. I visited her grave on a cool autumn afternoon, standing quietly with my hands folded in my coat pockets. "You were right," I whispered. "About all of it." For the first time, the words didn't feel heavy. They felt grounding. As the year came to a close, something unexpected happened. I felt open. Not desperate. Not searching. Just open. I noticed people again. Conversations without calculation. Smiles without strategy. I wasn't rushing toward companionship, but I wasn't hiding from it either. At a charity dinner hosted by the foundation, I found myself talking to a man named Daniel, an attorney specializing in nonprofit compliance. Intelligent. Calm. Unimpressed by titles. At one point, he laughed and said, "You know, I didn't realize you were that Judith Crawford until someone pointed it out." I smiled. "And that bothered you?" "Not at all," he said easily. "It just explains why everyone listens when you speak." There was no agenda in his tone. No curiosity about numbers. No entitlement hiding behind admiration. Just respect. Nothing more came of that evening, no promises, no expectations, but it reminded me that connection didn't have to come with extraction. Trust, I realized, grows best when it isn't rushed. The final paperwork from the divorce arrived just before winter. Everything closed. Nothing pending. No loose ends. I placed the documents in a folder and slid them into a drawer I rarely opened. That chapter didn't need revisiting. That night, I stood at my window watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. 5 years ago, I thought marriage was proof of stability. Now I understood something deeper. Stability isn't someone staying. It's knowing you'll stand, even if they leave. And for the first time in my adult life, I trusted myself completely. Closure doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic speeches. Most of the time, it slips in quietly, on an ordinary day, during an ordinary moment, when you realize something no longer hurts the way it used to. For me, that realization came while reorganizing my home office. I found an old photo tucked inside a drawer, Ethan and me at a charity gala during our second year of marriage. We looked perfect. Smiling. Polished. Untouchable. And yet, as I studied the image, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Not even regret. Just distance. I placed the photo into a shredder without hesitation and watched it disappear. That was the moment I knew I was free. Life after the divorce didn't transform into some fairy tale. It became better than that. It became honest. My days were full, but not chaotic. I woke up early, exercised without guilt, ate meals because I enjoyed them, not because I was compensating for emotional exhaustion. I traveled when I wanted to, not to escape, but to experience. And for the first time, I didn't measure my success by how useful I was to someone else. Brightvale Vale Analytics reached a milestone I'd quietly dreamed about for years: national recognition for ethical consulting practices. We were featured in a major business publication, highlighting how transparency and long-term planning could outperform aggressive short-term gains. When the reporter asked what inspired my leadership philosophy, I paused. Experience, I said simply. I didn't mention betrayal. I didn't mention courtrooms. I didn't need to. The foundation continued to grow beyond anything I'd imagined. Women from different states wrote letters, some handwritten, some typed through tears, thanking us for helping them understand their rights before it was too late. One letter stayed with me. I thought protecting myself meant I didn't believe in love, the woman wrote. Now I understand it means I believe in my future. I read it twice. Then I framed it. Ethan tried to contact me once more, nearly a year after the divorce. The message was short. I just want to talk. No lawyers. No money. Just talk. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Some conversations don't lead to healing, they reopen doors that should remain closed. I had forgiven him, but forgiveness didn't mean access. Boundaries, I'd learned, were not punishment. They were protection. As time passed, people stopped associating my name with scandal. The whispers faded. The story lost its shock value. I became known not as the woman who destroyed her husband in court, but as a respected professional, a philanthropist, a mentor. That distinction mattered. One evening, I hosted a small dinner at my home, friends, colleagues, a few people from the foundation. Laughter filled the space, effortless and warm. At one point, I stepped into the kitchen to refill a drink and caught my reflection in the glass. I looked peaceful. Not triumphant. Not hardened. Just whole. Daniel and I stayed in touch over the months, not as something defined, but as something allowed to unfold naturally. Coffee turned into conversations. Conversations turned into trust. He never asked about my inheritance. Never hinted at expectations. Never made me feel like I owed him anything. One night, as we walked through a quiet park, he said something that surprised me. You don't talk about your past much. I don't need to anymore, I replied. He nodded, understanding without probing. That, I realized, was the difference. Love shouldn't demand proof of pain. It should respect growth. On the anniversary of the divorce ruling, I took the day off work. No meetings. No emails. No obligations. I visited my grandmother's old house, the one she'd loved fiercely and protected with even fiercer wisdom. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching familiar door frames, breathing in memories. In the living room, sunlight poured through the windows just as it always had. I sat on the floor and laughed quietly to myself. Not because of irony. Because of gratitude. I had nearly lost everything, not financially, but emotionally. I had almost mistaken manipulation for partnership, dependence for devotion. But I hadn't. And that mattered. As I locked the door behind me and stepped back outside, I felt something settle firmly in place. My life was mine. Not borrowed. Not negotiated. Not threatened. Mine. And if there was one truth I carried forward, it was this: love should add to your life, not audit it. Partnership should empower, not entitle. And protecting yourself is not a lack of trust, it is an act of self-respect. I didn't win because I kept my money. I won because I kept myself.